What is going on, nerd paraders and fellow citizens? Welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me here today. In this video, we're going to help you decide between two very similar ships in Star Citizen that fulfill mostly the same role. These two ships are the RSI Scorpius and the Anvil Hurricane, and they are dual-seat heavy fighters. But before we kick off the video, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Nick, this is Nerd Parade, and let's do this right, shall we? So, as I mentioned, there are a lot of similarities between the Scorpius and the Hurricane. And for those out there that decide they want both in their fleet, well, I tip my imaginary hat to you and bid you good day. But for those of you out there that are looking to keep their fleet lean and mean, this video is going to help you choose the best. Now first, we're going to be talking about visibility. If you aren't already, I would suggest watching this in full screen because it's really going to help make this look a lot better. In this side-by-side comparison, we take a look at the cockpit view of the Hurricane here on the left and the Scorpius on the right. You'll notice right away that while the Hurricane's view isn't bad, it does have a couple of struts there that slightly obstruct the pilot's view, whereas the Scorpius is completely unobstructed. Moving over here to the gunner seats, there isn't much of a difference. The Scorpius turret is a remote turret, and much like the cockpit, offers practically unrestricted viewing, whereas the Hurricane does have a small bit of obstructions on the turret. In our next segment, we're going to be talking about shields, armor, and the cross-section of the ships. And now both ships have the same size shield generator, so there's really no difference here. And while the Scorpius might win slightly when it comes to pilot and gunner views, there is a potentially critical flaw that needs to be discussed, and I want to do that pretty early in the video here. While this isn't fully implemented in the game yet, at the time of this video recording, check the date below if you need to, hull armor will eventually make its way into the Star Citizen verse. And if we examine the Scorpius closer, we notice that it has a nose HP of 80. Comparing this to the Hurricane's nose HP of 7,500, there is a pretty big difference. While you'll notice over here that the Scorpius does have a higher overall armor value than the Hurricane, pretty significantly so, once hull armor is fully implemented into the game, that's not going to stop a well-placed shot to the cockpit of a Scorpius from spelling complete game over, in spite of its superior overall armor. The Hurricane, on the other hand, has more of a balanced approach to its defenses. And while its overall armor is lower, like I mentioned, than that of the Scorpius, it does avoid these critical vulnerabilities that the Scorpius has. And if you're not familiar with this tool, this is Urkel.Games' DPS calculator for Star Citizen. This tool is basically your best friend whenever you're customizing a loadout or any type of ship component. If you haven't played with it yet, or if you're new to Star Citizen, definitely bookmark this page. I'll put the link in the description of the video as well. Another very important thing to consider is the size or cross-section of these two ships. You'll notice that the Scorpius is slightly larger than the Hurricane. This means in actual combat, the Hurricane is going to be slightly more difficult to hit than that of the Scorpius. These sizes and cross-sections aren't hugely different, but every little bit can count in combat. Additionally, the Scorpius transforms to spread out its wings in an X-Wing style fashion, and this also slightly adds to the size of its hitbox or cross-section. We'll talk a bit more about this later because it does come into play. So while the Scorpius easily wins in the comparison of visibility, we do have to give the armor cross-section category over to the Hurricane because of these potentially critical flaws and the fact that it has a smaller cross-section. If you happen to be watching this video trying to decide if you should get into Star Citizen or not, then you should definitely make sure you save someone's referral code. For if or when you decide to join, using someone's referral code gives you bonuses, and it also helps out the person whose code that you use. I'll put mine up here on the screen for the remainder of the video, and also put it in the video description for easy copy pasta purposes, just in case you don't already have one. Our next segment is going to be weaponry. Now, the big difference in firepower between the Hurricane and the Scorpius are going to be the pilot-controlled guns. Both turret gunners have exactly the same weapons. That's 4 size 3 weapons. They're laser repeaters by default. so there's no difference between either of the ships in this category. But the pilots, on the other hand, for the Scorpius, there are 4 size 3 hardpoints that are located on the tips of each wing. The Hurricane has 2 size 4 hardpoints that are pretty much right next to the cockpit on either side. Now the Hurricane can easily swap out its existing gimbaled weapons for fixed ones. This is a pretty big boost in firepower at the cost of some targeting assistance that the gimbals would provide. However, since the hardpoints are so close together and pretty much right at the nose of the ship anyway, it's fairly easy to get shots on target even if you sacrifice the gimbal assistance in this case. The Scorpius, on the other hand, has a rather large spread with the hardpoints located at the tips of the wings. So unless you're going up against larger ships, you're going to benefit more from keeping the gimbal assist in this case on the Scorpius, in my opinion. It's also important to highlight that as far as missile payload goes, the Scorpius does offer a bigger payload than the Hurricane. So let's talk actual damage numbers. On paper, you'll see that the Scorpius wins when it comes to damage, but we need to break this down because very rarely is it ever that simple. So going with what we talked about just a moment ago, we're going to swap out our gimbaled weapons with the Hurricane for fixed one, and leave the gimbals on the Scorpius so that we can have the targeting assistance since the spread is so wide. The Scorpius is still ahead of the Hurricane here damage-wise, but this again is a paper situation. In actual combat, it is not uncommon for one or multiple wings on the Scorpius to get damaged or blown off. If this happens, which is very likely, you'll also lose access to the gun on that wing. So for example, if we're to lose one wing on the Scorpius, you'll notice here that the DPS number now drops below that of the Hurricane. Not by much, but my point is that your DPS can suffer based on the damage your ship might take. The Hurricane, on the other hand, in combat, 99% of the time, because never say never, will not lose any guns due to damage suffered. I point this out so that you look at a ship's paper DPS and don't make a definitive decision in choosing a ship based solely on that. Always account for actual combat performance. So for these reasons, I need to give the damage section over to the Hurricane, and it wins this segment. If you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. Also, ring the bell so that you're notified whenever I post new videos. Lastly, let's talk about handling. Without getting into the exact pitch, yaw, and roll ratios for each ship, we're going to focus the discussion more on how each ship feels to pilot, and how quickly it can intercept or catch up to a target. The Scorpius has a combat speed of 218 meters per second, and a max speed to chase down runners of 1,250 meters per second. This is pretty fast. This is pretty darn fast. The Scorpius handles and turns very, very well, and can easily disengage as well as engage in most combat situations. The Hurricane has a combat speed of 180 meters per second, which is a little bit slower than the Scorpius, and its max speed for intercepting or running down targets is 1,232 meters per second. Still pretty fast, but it falls slightly below the Scorpius at 1,250. As for handling, the Hurricane doesn't handle badly by any means. In fact, I would rate it as slightly above average in overall handling. It does feel, however, a little bit less nimble than the Scorpius. In most situations, if your pilot style relies more on doing circles around your opponent, then you're going to prefer the feel of the Scorpius slightly more. However, if you're more of a gun 'em down style pilot, you might find it slightly easier to get shots on target with the Hurricane's style of handling. Since the Scorpius comes out slightly ahead here with its overall speed and nimbleness, we're going to give this category over to it. So if you've been keeping track so far, you'll notice the score is 2-2. The defining factor here is what ship do you like better? Now, I'm not going to leave you here and be a typical YouTuber of, oh, you've got to make your own decision from this point. No. I chose the Anvil Hurricane, and I'm going to tell you why. The Anvil Hurricane does not have any of the potential firepower losses that the Scorpius can suffer. I will not sacrifice any of my precious firepowers. No, absolutely not. And I'm also rather concerned about the future vulnerability of the cockpit that the Scorpius could be facing once hull armor is a thing. But please let me know what ship you are choosing for your dual seat fighter in the comments. And don't say the Gladiator. Oh my gosh, that ship is a bomber. It doesn't count as a dual seat fighter. Although it's awesome, it's a little beast. It doesn't qualify. You have to pick one or the other here. Remember to take care of yourselves out there, nerd paraders. Stay awesome and come back to hang with me real soon. Until the next video, I'll catch you later.